Hey, everybody. We are back with the Wisconsin Motor Carriers Association podcast, The Road Ahead. I'm Dan Johnson, president of the Wisconsin Motor Carriers Association. I'd like to welcome you all back. It is July, and we're blowing right through a very warm summer. Right now, I know everybody's been kind of going through it, but hey, in a couple of months, we'll be complaining about the cold winter weather, I'm sure. We have a really great episode this time around. Speaking of winter weather, when we started this podcast back in January, we started off with FMCSA updates, talking about everything that was in the pipeline, everything that was sort of in the works, things that have worked, things that have not worked, and things that were coming on the horizon. It's been a few months, so we're going to jump back into some FMCSA regulatory topics, and we've got really somebody who's not only been in the FMCSA but out of the FMCSA, so he knows all the ins and outs, I guess. He's a very good partner with the Wisconsin Motor Carriers Association. I think back in 2018, he was one of our guest speakers at our convention. Very energetic, enthusiastic gentleman. He knows his stuff. Today's podcast is sponsored by Trucking Wins. Running a trucking company is tough. Staying compliant, lowering insurance costs, managing drivers, and keeping up with FMCSA regulations can feel like a full-time job. That's where Trucking Wins comes in. Founded by nationally recognized DOT expert and former FMCSA roadside inspector John Seidl, Trucking Wins gives carriers and owner-operators the training, tools, and coaching they need to improve compliance, reduce risk, and run a more profitable operation. Learn how to lower expenses, increase revenue, and build a stronger trucking business at truckingwins.com. We are bringing in and welcoming in the aforementioned DOT expert, John Seidl. We're very glad to have him this morning, and he's going to talk about everything that you need to know or maybe didn't want to know about the FMCSA and what they're up to and what's going on this year. So, John, welcome to the Wisconsin Motor Carriers Association podcast, and good to see you again, my friend. And just, real quick, give us some of your pedigree, what you're all about, and tell us a little bit more about Trucking Wins.
First, I want to say thank you for bringing me on this podcast with the Wisconsin Motor Carriers Association. I feel like I'm back home, right? We've done a lot of work together in the past, and I've been running around the country doing different things since my career at FMCSA, and now it feels like I found my way back home in a sense. But for those that don't know me, I used to be a state patrol inspector in Wisconsin, worked the Racine and Kenosha scales. After I left the Wisconsin State Patrol, I became an investigator with FMCSA. Some people listening to this might have got a visit from me back in the day. And if it went great, I'm happy for that. And if you didn't like it, I'm sorry. Right. So, and then I left FMCSA and became a hazmat agent with the FAA. So all DOT compliance, trucking regulation with the DOT. And I kind of flipped in my career and got my insurance license, started selling insurance. And with focusing on insurance for so many years, that's kind of where I drifted away from associations and safety. Now I'm refocusing back more away from insurance and towards trucking safety so I can help more carriers. That's where Trucking Wins came about. A lot of my insureds wanted guidance and help, like this podcast. And I developed Trucking Wins for my insurance carrier customers first. And then people are like, well, I don't want to do my insurance with you. Can I still access Trucking Wins? And I said, sure. So www.truckingwins.com is a website accessible to everybody, has training videos, has a weekly podcast similar to this, but instead of you asking me questions, Dan, the customers ask me questions and I help them with data queues, CSA and all that. But that's a little background of where I was when I was associated with the motor carriers and where I am now. My focus now is to help trucking companies navigate this world of FMCSA compliance safety with a little bit of insurance guidance thrown in.
Yeah, and John, and he's been a great partner for the motor carriers for the last several years, as I mentioned. Trucking Wins is a new member to the Wisconsin Motor Carriers Association. We're very happy to have them in. And, with a lot of our non-trucking companies, we really enjoy this opportunity to partner with them and really cut through a lot of the stuff that people just, quite frankly, don't understand. And with this podcast, the beauty of this is you can go back. We can have our members, re-listen. We put this up on YouTube video, so they can watch it and they can play it back and get that information that they need. So like I mentioned, John, 6 months ago, FMCSA, they were rolling out a lot of new regulations. A lot of things had happened over the last 8 or 12 months that I think shocked the agency, that they saw a lot of things happening out there. There was a return to safety, getting people, who should be on the road and quite frankly, who should not be on the road, taken care of. So we talked a lot about that 6 months ago, but what's happening right now with the FMCSA? What do they got, what's at the top of mind for them right now?
Well, I think to break that down into, there's a lot of things going on, obviously, but three of them jump up to me. One is this driver shortage issue that we've had in the past. When the market went bad several years ago, the talk of a driver shortage started to dissipate. And now that the market seems to be improving, that's what I'm hearing from customers, you hear this word of driver shortage coming back to the forefront. Because we had a market that was challenging. A lot of drivers left the marketplace because they just weren't making the money, along with trucking companies. Now with the market improving, we got to try to get those drivers back. The problem is the new regulation for English language proficiency and the non-domiciled CDL driver is having an effect and will continue to have an effect on what was already an issue of the past that I've heard customers start to say it's a problem. So that's one area that is certainly at the forefront for sure.
And, sort of diving into the English language proficiency a little bit, we've heard from carriers who have asked us, is there a standardized test or something that we can do? Obviously, carriers, they're probably going to start looking at their workforce and trying to determine if there might be a problem, and is there something that they can provide to their drivers to make sure that, they are, I don't want to say fluent, but have that proficiency to talk to an inspector or and understand road signs. So, what are you hearing from your customers and your carriers about navigating the English language proficiency? Are they struggling with that, or is it something that's pretty common sense?
Here's an interesting way to look at this. Let's start with this, Dan. On FMCSA's website, you can go to Google, and maybe we can provide the link from the government on the motor carrier's website after this podcast is over.
Sure.
But you go to the government website for English language proficiency, and they give you a memo that's dated May of 2025. What was that? A little over a year ago, right? But the memo's redacted. It's got a bunch of blacked out parts to it. The driver interview section is redacted. The street sign section is redacted. They don't want you to know, and I don't know why, what questions law enforcement is going to ask. Now, I don't want to say that I should have got it, but I have in my possession the actual memo that state patrol inspectors in Wisconsin and all around the country have in their possession. That is unredacted. I don't understand why the government won't give motor carriers the unredacted memo on how to analyze these drivers. Why does it have to be redacted? It's not like you're going to teach someone English just because you give them a list of street signs and some questions. You can either speak or you can't, you see?
Yeah.
So I find that interesting that the memo is redacted and unredacted. And I don't know if you guys are comfortable. It is an internal enforcement memo. Dan, I'm going to give you both of them and you can decide what you do with both of them.
Yeah. From our standpoint, we reach out to our partners with the association, and I'm not going to name the companies, but there are some companies that are working on a standardized test, if you will, on how to properly vet your drivers to make sure that they have those they have that language proficiency. As to whether it's working or not, and like you said, we don't know what inspectors or the enforcement agencies are doing out there on the road, quite frankly, and how they're implementing ELP, and it may vary from state to state.
Well, because I used to be a state patrol inspector, what FMCSA would do is give me the memo that's not redacted. And the memo has 2 steps. Step 1 is a formal driver interview. Step 2 is 37 street signs, of which they will point at 4 of them randomly, and the driver has to answer 3 of them correctly. If you pass the driver interview, then you make it to step 2, the street signs. If you fail the driver interview, you don't. This memo I referred to, if you read it as a safety director, you should be able to use that memo yourself without any third party to go through the memo and pretend you're a state patrol inspector for 5 minutes. The state patrol inspectors are smart, and so are safety directors. You don't need a third party to tell you if you had the memo in your hand.
Right.
Now, a little history on this memo and the ELP, Dan. I think this is interesting. The regulation for ELP 39111B2 was written in 1970. Since 1970, have they changed the regulation at all? Nope, not once, never. The regulation is exactly the same, word for word, as it was in 1970. Now, I'm going to date myself a bit. In 2007 and 2008, they came out with a memo that said how to enforce it. And that was an interview and street signs. Then in 2016, they threw that memo in the garbage and came out with a new memo because of the American Disabilities Act, and you had to accommodate this non-English speaking language as a disability or something. 2016, they said you can use translators, cue cards, smartphone apps. So they didn't change the law, the regulation. They just changed the memo. Then in May of 25, they came out with a memo again. And the memo from 2025 was almost exactly the same as the memo from 0708. In 0708, they were placing drivers out of service. In 2025, they're placing drivers out of service. Back then, it was an interview and street signs. Now, it's that again. It was the memo in the middle that made no sense. And just for everybody, I will send you the 07 memo, the 08 memo, the 2016 memo, and the 2025 memo. And if you print them all and put them next to each other, it almost feels a little bit like nonsense that they keep changing enforcement memos when the regulation has stayed the same since 1970.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's done for political reasons or what it's done, but I mean, we see changes in administration, right? Yeah, and there are different interpretations, perhaps. So there's some of that, and so let's move on to non-domiciled CDLs. I mean, we touched on it just a little bit, but just for those who might be listening out there, don't really, what does a non-domiciled CDL actually mean? What is that?
So this is, I'm going to go back a little bit in the history of what just occurred in the last 12 months, right? Yep. There was a crash down in Florida, and a driver who was a non-U.S. citizen and not legally in the United States had a crash and someone passed, right? Right. So then that got on the radar screen, which sometimes crashes like that do that. Sean Duffy, as you know, being from Wisconsin, and the Trump administration came out with a memo that we're going to do something about this. And last fall, around September of 2005, they did what's called an interim final rule. An interim final rule is not what they normally do. As you know, with motor carriers going to D.C. and doing a lot of their talks with D.C., right. They do a proposed rule with comments, then a notice of final rule with the OMB, Office of Management Budget, doing their part of how it's going to affect the economy. Then it becomes a final rule. Well, last September, they said, you know what? This is so important. We're going to skip the proposed rule. We're going to skip the comments as a proposed rule to do a final rule. We're going to make this final right now. And someone sued FMCSA and won. So they paused it. So it was in effect, then they paused it, and then early 2016, around February, the Federal Register came out saying it's final now. Then in March, it became effective. There are 3 major things that people are not understanding with this. If you are a non-U.S. citizen, you can only hold 3 visas. 3. An E2 treaty investor visa, an H2A, and an H2B. If you don't hold one of those 3 visas, you could be legally allowed to be and work in the United States, You can't get a CDL. You can't renew your CDL. You can't move to another state. You can't add an endorsement. You can't lift a restriction. So as of right now, there are drivers out there that do not have those visas, but they have a valid CDL.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen? We're going to lose those drivers. The Federal Register said this. They anticipate 6,000 new CDLs issued with those visas per year. But they anticipate 194,000 drivers to leave the marketplace through attrition of CDL renewals. Now, some states are allowed to go and take the CDLs now. The problem is they have no idea if the driver has those 3 visas or not because they didn't ask when they gave the CDL.
Right.
So now when you renew, if you're not a U.S. citizen, you have to walk your butt into the DMV and you got to hand them those visas or they're not going to renew your CDL.
And so what should fleets be doing? What should carriers be doing if they employ drivers with a non-domiciled CDL? I mean, is this something, do they need to go back and audit and re-vet? Or, I mean, what is the process? What, if they're sitting there like, we don't really know, how if the expiration dates match up or, what? I mean, is it something that they should be
Here's my thing. About? Let's think about where a carrier could get into trouble. If the driver has a valid CDL, his CDL is valid until the state takes it away. That's what the Federal Register said, that the states don't have to do proactive, projects to get it. So you're not going to get violated at roadside. The feds come in, they're not going to violate you. Insurance companies aren't going to say anything because it's not flagged. They have valid CDLs. Who's going to get you? The attorney. These billboard attorneys, one call that's all fear the beard. They're going to call, we all know those because it's from Wisconsin, right?
Right.
They're going to say, hey, through discovery, this driver's not a U.S. citizen and he doesn't hold one of those 3 visas. Why didn't you take the position of the state and remove him from your truck knowing when he went to renew his CDL, they were going to take it away? So what would I do as a trucking company if it were me? Because I fear the lawsuit. I do. I would see if they're a U.S. citizen. If they're not, I would tell the driver to bring me one of those valid 3 visas. If they don't, I would terminate them. Yeah. Even though they currently have a valid CDL, I'd get rid of them.
Yeah. And that does make sense because they've got to protect their interests, like you said. I mean, I haven't seen it so much here in Wisconsin, but we know that those big verdicts and those lawsuits, they're out there, right? And they're crushing. They're absolutely crushing some carriers. A reminder here that today's podcast is sponsored by Trucking Wins. Want to run a safer, more profitable trucking company? Trucking Wins helps owner-operators and fleets improve DOT compliance, lower costs, and grow with confidence. Get expert training and coaching from former FMCSA Inspector John Seidl, our guest today, at truckingwins.com. All right. So we talked about ELP. We talked about non-domiciled CDLs. I know a lot of people have heard a lot about that. Probably an even bigger issue that I think that people have been watching for years now was the recent Supreme Court decision, the Montgomery decision that came down about a month ago, I think, the broker liability issue. And I'm not asking you to be a court analyst or a legal scholar or anything like that, but just for the benefit of our listeners, give us like the elevator version of the Supreme Court's decision. What did they actually say? What was their decision that came down? I believe it was a unanimous decision.
Well, I have been hired as an expert witness by a lot of different insurance carriers, whether it be Great West, West Bend Acuity, many others, Carolina Casualty. And whenever I go and help with these lawsuits, I never see a freight broker listed on the lawsuit. It's always the trucking company and the driver, trucking company driver, trucking company driver. With this decision, what it means is when I go and see a lawsuit for a nuclear verdict, it's going to show the trucking company, the driver, and we're going to start to see a third name on there. And that third name is going to be the freight broker that hired that trucking company and gave them freight. Now, does that mean every lawsuit will have the freight broker? No. but we're going to start seeing them listed. And it may become a standard where these attorneys just automatically throw them on there and then remove them later. So under discovery, if that trucking company has a bad CSA score, bad MVR for the driver, horrible application, bad history, they're going to say, brokerage, why didn't you vet this carrier? And why did you give them a load knowing they were this unsafe? What's historically been the case? The trucking company is questioned, why would you hire this driver? Now it's going to be, broker, why did you hire the trucking company and the driver?
Right.
So now these brokerages are going to have to defend themselves. So what do they need to do? They need to make sure they don't give freight to bad carriers. What does a bad carrier mean? High CSA scores, conditional rating, a lot of crashes, right? Lawsuits of a public record. Anything that a brokerage can do to look at a trucking company and or go down to the driver, that brokerage better be doing that. Now, this case happened from a crash in 2017 in Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
It took this long, 9 years, for that to go through the entire appeals process to the Supreme Court, for the Supreme Court to say, you know what? Negligent tort law does apply to a freight broker on a state basis. It's still within the jurisdiction of the state, but you're going to see them named. So what do I see? I see freight brokers doing even more to vet carriers. Interesting. Some might say, well, they're going to have to start vetting carriers. No. In 2017, when this lawsuit happened and the judgment was in favor of the plaintiff, and then it went into the appeals, brokers already started to vet trucking companies and not use them. They stopped using trucking companies. They stopped using trucking companies that were conditional. They started limiting how much you would be able to use a trucking company with bad CSA scores, right? Now, do I think they're going to go even further? Yes. Now, how do these brokers do it? Highway, Carrier 411, Carrier Software, Central Analysis Bureau, CAB. These third-party entities get a direct feed from the government. They used to have to pay for it, but now it's free. They get a direct feed from the government. They analyze all the data, and they give the CSA scores for sale to brokers, etc. Does that make sense? Yeah. Even though it's not, quote, open to the public can get it with a fee attached to it.
Sure. So obviously there's going to be a heightened vetting process. You don't, just by what you're telling me, it's not going to be incredibly difficult for them to go through that process. I mean, it's going to be a much longer vetting process, I think, but it's not going to be a new obstacle for the brokers to go through this vetting process because they've already been going through it.
Yeah, I think the brokers already have, or the good ones. Let's go back. Let's take a step back.
Yeah.
There are large, multi-million dollar, if not billion-dollar revenue freight brokers in the country that have absolutely been vetting carriers, like I just said. However, there are many trucking companies with assets that have their own brokerage. They're not a multi-million, billion-dollar freight broker that's part of the Transportation Intermediaries Association. They're just a trucking company that has a little bit of extra freight that puts the freight with their brokerage and hires a few trucking companies. Mm-hmm. They do not have the vetting processes of the larger brokers. That 2017 case did not scare the mom and pop freight broker, say in the state of Wisconsin, from vetting. This should now scare them, because if I ever find a freight broker hiring carriers and I'm like, ugh, it's the mom and pop trucking companies with the freight brokers that are not doing it correctly. Mm-hmm. They should be worried.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a lot to absorb. I know a lot of folks who are sort of hanging on pins and needles on the Supreme Court's decision. So now here it is. And I mean, I think that vetting process.
Dan, I do want to say one more thing on that topic. This is an angle. So in this podcast, I want to give people something to think about that maybe they haven't thought of, right? So now we just said freight brokers can be held liable if they hire a bad trucking company. There are shippers all over the country, shippers and receivers, that are hiring bad trucking companies, just like the freight brokers. This decision did not specifically include shippers and receivers. But if you use your common sense, you can't tell me that if a lawsuit went all the way to the Supreme Court like this C.H. Robinson broker one, because a shipper receiver hired a bad company, they're not going to be equally liable.
Right.
So I think freight brokers should start scaring shippers receivers into using them as a freight broker to say, hey, do you want to get sued because you hired a bad carrier when you don't even know how to vet them? You should give your freight to me, the freight broker, so I can vet them. And I'll be one level of defense against you, the shippers receivers. So hear me out on this, Dan. Any trucking company out there that has direct contacts with shippers receivers, be careful.
Yeah,
because you might start losing some of your freight to freight brokers because the freight brokers are going to scare the shippers receivers from using trucking companies. And how do you fix that as a small trucking company? Start your own freight brokerage now. I have a company in central Wisconsin, north of Madison. Dan, I'm proud of this. They had 2 trucking companies that they've had for years. Sometimes people have 2. The one with all the freight was called Trucking Company A. The one that got freight was called Trucking Company B. They were sister companies. Trucking Company A, we closed it down in January, and we turned it into a freight brokerage. We turned a trucking company into a freight brokerage because it already had all the freight contracts, and the customer was cool with it because that's who they have a contract with. And the agreement was, we're only going to hire our other trucking company to do the freight. So now, instead of that owner having 2 trucking companies, they had their own freight brokerage with all the freight through the freight brokerage, and they broker the freight to themselves. Now, if a lawsuit comes, they just single-handedly protected the shipper and the receiver a little more than they would have been had they just hired trucking companies. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
yeah.
I thought that was a unique little angle that you probably haven't heard about this ruling. Yeah. So me as a trucking company, I'm starting a freight brokerage, and it's not hard. It's so easy to start a freight brokerage, and it's cheap. Doesn't cost nothing.
Okay. Yeah, a lot to take in with this. Whenever the Supreme Court brings down a ruling like this, we're going to switch gears just a little bit and talk about something that we've been hearing a lot about. I know a lot of people have been really ringing the bell on this one, and that's the FMC's new. I don't know if it's new, but this modus that has come out, and just a little bit of history. I think the idea of modus has been around for many, many years. This is nothing necessarily new under FMCSA. But they've launched this modus program, which is consolidating a lot of different authorities and try to make things a little bit more efficient, actually a lot more efficient. But it has run into a significant amount of problems. We've been hearing from our members about issues that they're having with modus. First of all, I mean, what is your historical understanding of what FMCSA is trying to do here with modus?
I mean, everybody has seen a federal regulation associated with login.gov take over our lives. Yeah. Whether it be the portal, CSA scores, the clearinghouse, registration, all of those things have gone through login.gov. Why have they pivoted from just signing in of the past to login.gov? To stop fraud. It's 100% to stop fraud.
Right.
So now the problem with the old registration system is Elmer Fudd could go get a DOT number. Mickey Mouse, Bugs Bunny, they could all go get a DOT number, make changes, get freight, have an MC number. And the government wants to stop Elmer Fudd, Bugs Bunny, and Mickey Mouse from getting a DOT number with an MC and authority. So now I can see you on this podcast, Dan, and you can see me. You cannot operate a trucking company without someone's face being responsible. And if you sent in a driver's license from Elmer Fudd or Bugs Bunny, it wouldn't work, right? So it's 100% to stop fraud and hold somebody accountable for all this fraudulent activity that we've seen in recent years, but for decades, right? That's the whole point of Modus.
Yeah. And now, so are you hearing from any of your customers as well as how to navigate? Is that something that Trucking Wins helps try to navigate? I mean, I know it's, it's like trying to turn a cruise ship with an oar, but I mean, is this something that can be accomplished through a service like Trucking Wins, or is this just kind of like everybody just sits back and waits for the government for everything to kind of like calm down?
I have got probably 100+ customers into the Modus system personally. I have done it myself on a Zoom call with hundreds of them, and I have customers that have made it all the way to the end and they're fine. I've also had customers have some problems. Now let's go talk about Modus from a problem perspective. Dan, do you remember SafeStat before CSA?
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking old school now. Some of these younger truckers are like, what's SafeStat? When we moved from SafeStat to CSA, we had these same problems with IT and the federal government. When we opened the clearinghouse, we had these same issues.
Right.
The portal has been having these issues for years, right? So for us to be surprised that when they roll out something like Modus, it's got issues, we knew that was coming. Look at when they moved medical card responsibilities for upload to the medical examiners.
Right.
That was a nightmare. The states weren't ready. Nobody was ready. So it's not like Modus is an anomaly that someone in this industry didn't see coming, because I saw it coming. So what FMCSA did really well, I'm going to give them credit. They did tell people to update your MCS 150 right now. Yep. They said, make sure your MCS 150 is up to date.
Yep.
Why did they say that? Because if you had a problem with Modus, you knew you had your MCS 150 up to date, everything was current, and you wouldn't lose your authority because you missed your update date. So kudos to them for that. So I push that like crazy. Now think about it, Dan. If you're not in Modus right now, what do you do in Modus anyway? You update your MCS 150. Yeah. Well, if your trucks are right and your drivers are right and your mileage is right and you did it recently, chill. There's no rush to get in there. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't get your scores from there right now. You don't get to the clearinghouse. You don't do data queues.
Right.
The portal's still open to do all those things. So if your MCS 150 is good to go and you're not looking at a biennial update imminently, just relax. You don't need to be in there yet.
Yeah. Well, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there's growing pains with every change. I mean, this was a significant change, no doubt about it. And I think everybody is trying to navigate it. Like you said, we have heard from some of our carriers, they're getting through, or the wait time is not as long as it used to be, or they're breaking through the log jam. So I think it is happening. I think there is just a little bit of patience, even though I know it's frustrating for a lot of carriers who might have been losing loads or not having authority for a day or two. I mean, that's extremely concerning.
I'm going to explain to you with that, Dan. You bring that up. There is a problem with Modus, and I think this is the biggest problem that occurred with Modus. And I know this podcast is going to, be at the end of July, which is wonderful. We're recording it a little bit earlier. It's no problem. Yeah. They may have fixed this by then, but this is an interesting story about Modus. I had a trucking company that had no hazmat, none. They did not update their MCS 150 at all. They had no hazmat roadside inspection in 4 years. Their minimum insurance was $750. They moved from auto owners to protective July 1st, right? July 1st. Mm-hmm. And protective, the new market, filed $750 because that's what they filed for a decade. Modus, in a glitch, and the government called it a computer glitch, moved their minimum required to $1 million, even though they didn't update their MCS 150 and there was no hazmat inspection. So when 750 got filed, the MC number went inactive because they didn't meet the insurance. Then Protective immediately, credit to them, filed $1 million the next day, like now. But they weren't talking to each other. So Modus and the new insurance filing, once it hit $1 million, which was the minimum, even though it wasn't supposed to be switched, even though it's now active in the system, the MC number is still inactive, so they can't get loads. And FMCSA said, we're working on it. This is a death sentence for a trucking company.
Right.
Losing your MC number, not being able to update it and get it active because of an insurance glitch with the minimum amount,
Right.
that is unacceptable, right? That is scary, that you could almost bankrupt or shut down a company or hurt them financially for many, many years because of this glitch. I think that rose to the level of, ugh. So I had my trucking company drive to the division office in the state of Kentucky and knock on the FMCSA division door. And they did. And the division administrator and the federal program manager said, we used to be able to fix things at our level. They have taken that away from us. We can't fix it. We're sorry. They're working on it. That is not an acceptable answer, right?
Right. It's
so
not.
I saw that happen. And opposite of those major things, let's just be patient as an industry.
Sure. Well, John, we're getting close towards the end of our podcast, but I want to do a quick lightning round with you, if you don't mind. And you can pass on any one of these if you want to. Biggest compliance mistake that fleets are making right now, in your opinion?
I think CSA scores. I don't care if the new revised CSA scoring system comes out, which we know we've been sitting on for a couple years, right? That's just dormant for whatever reason. I don't care if it's 3 points, 2 points, 1 point, whether they move CSA scores. Trucking companies need to get in further compliance when it comes to a roadside inspection. Brakes, lights, tires, hours of service, DQ files, speeding, unsafe driving. Get a handle on that, because no matter how the government scores you, what does it matter if you're not giving them any adverse data to score?
Right.
So to me, the biggest compliance mistake they make is controlling roadside inspections, not taking all these violations serious.
Yeah. Most overrated trucking controversy.
I think right now it's Modus.
Okay.
It's a topic that needs to be discussed, but it's not the most important thing if you really think about what you need it for right now. Yeah. It really only serves a couple purposes, which is updating your registration, making sure your information is valid. If you're current with that stuff anyway, you could wait a year before you get into Modus. They're not going to shut you down because you haven't logged in. So I think it's a little overrated, the amount of attention it's getting, unless you think you have a problem. But as you know, Dan, they just suspended the removal of authority because you didn't update it in time.
Right.
So, if you're not one of these companies that lost their authority through the glitch I talked about, just relax until maybe something like another glitch happens, and then you can overreact,
Right.
So,
and on that same line of thought, most underrated trucking issue, in your opinion?
I think there's two of them. One is this revised CSA. For years, that IRT, that like response theory that was going to replace CSA, MAP 21. Yeah. We're talking years and years and years. They've been required to revise CSA. They put out a proposal in February of 2023. And in November of 24, they said, we're good. We're going to launch. It's now mid-year 2026, and they have not revised that CSA. They're ready. You can go on your CSA scores and see what they would be under that proposed rule change. The CSA revision, they published it. They got the comments. They said they're ready. They said they're going to launch it. What if it launches in 2 months? Then people are going to be like, what happened to my CSA? That's not dead. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's still there. And the other one is what I call garbage ELDs. There are companies overseas, most prominently, where there are 100 employees modifying the ELD data files. So when the officer receives the data file at roadside, it's a lie. When the government investigator knocks on the door and gets the transfer file for a review, it's a lie, because there are 100 employees in an office overseas editing the files as the vendor. They call them flexible logs or whatever. But to FMCSA's credit, if you go on the ELD list, they didn't revoke any ELDs until the last few years. Mm-hmm. FMCSA is doing a heck of a job revoking ELDs because of illegal tampering issues.
Right.
Yes, it's been a self-certified ELD, but at least for the last 2 years, I've seen the government really attacking those. So to me, that's underrated because no one's given the government credit for trying to attack that issue.
Right, right. And finally, little crystal ball here. What should fleet owners be paying attention to that really nobody's talking about?
I think it goes back to how we started this podcast. It's the driver shortage.
Yeah.
When we had a wonderful market, we didn't have enough drivers. We did not have enough drivers, and we all know that. This was a topic that we talked about on these podcasts 4 or 5 years ago. Then when the market went south, we didn't need as many drivers because of supply and demand, and it started to dissipate. Plus, they started giving CDLs to a bunch of ELPs and non-domiciles. So now we have this thing coming at us all at once. An improved market, less companies and drivers in the industry still, so we have to get them back. And we're going to remove over 200,000 drivers in the next CDL cycle. Now, I'm not saying those drivers should stay. That's not what I'm saying. But we have to understand they're leaving.
Yeah.
Over 200,000 drivers they're projecting out of the industry when we need more drivers. So it's like a double-edged sword. So pay attention to this whole driver recruiting thing. That's a tough thing to navigate nowadays.
Yeah. Well, John, again, thank you for joining us. I'm going to give you 20 seconds, final thoughts, anything you want to say.
All right. So a lot of people might know me from Wisconsin. I'll say I'm back, right? I'm going to be more active with the motor carriers. I'm really promoting truck safety through Trucking Wins. I still dabble in a little bit of insurance education. So I'm pretty well versed in that. And you know, Dan, how I've always been a safety guy.
Yep.
These years of me selling insurance for 10 years, I came pretty astute in captives, owner-operator programs, and all of that. I'm focusing more on truck safety because the trucking company with 7 trucks, 6 trucks, 5 trucks, they have to do everything. They're the owner, the dispatcher, the safety director. They're everything. I've been focusing my efforts on larger companies, but I love that Trucking Wins focuses energy on the small, mom and pop, and they need as much help as everybody else. That's why I'm proud to have done, www.truckingwins. So there's a monthly membership. There's an annual membership. I'm live on a podcast every week. Come check it out.
Yeah,
if you don't like it, cancel.
Well, again, I appreciate the time you took with us today, John. Really do appreciate your insight and your expertise, and just thank you again for everything that you do to keep us all safe out there, quite frankly. And just a reminder to all of our listeners out there, we have some really great events coming up for the WMCA in August. August 18th, we have our Brewers Tailgate Party, which is a lot of fun. It's obviously at American Family Field. Go Brewers. Check it out on witruck.org. We've got our August 26th golf outing here in the Madison area at the Oaks. Again, it's on our events page on our website. And of course, September 9 and 10th is our annual convention. We are going to be in beautiful Delavan, Wisconsin on Delavan Lake at the Lake Lawn Resort for that. And we've got a lot of great speakers. Chris Spear from the American Trucking Association is going to be one of our guests, along with some other very, very fine speakers. So check that out. All on witruck.org. All of our events are right there. So again, John, thank you so much. And thank you to Trucking Wins for sponsoring today's podcast. We greatly appreciate it. I hope you have a very safe rest of your summer. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Don't forget, our podcasts drop every Friday, the last Friday of the month, here on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. So check us out. And again, thanks everybody for joining us. I'm Dan Johnson with the Wisconsin Motor Carriers Association, and we will see you next time on The Road Ahead.